You're listening to Permission to Shine, the podcast. Stories of overcoming obstacles and finding self-empowerment with Sherisse Bisram, Inner Power Activation Leader. The Oxford Dictionary describes permission as the action of officially allowing someone to do a particular thing, consent, authorization. What if you were that someone and you gave yourself the permission to be everything you wanted to be and more? No more playing small and accepting less than. You are worthy of the life of your dreams, regardless of what it is that you've been through. And honestly, it's exactly what you've been through that has shaped you into the version of yourself that you are now. Like a diamond, you've endured so much, but instead of breaking, you have become stronger and brighter. And if that's not a reason to shine, then I don't know what is. And if nature can do it, then why the hell can't you? You are brave, you are strong, you are powerful, and you are enough. Hear my call and give yourself the permission to shine, because you don't realise how many people are inspired by your light. Hello everyone, we are back. This is episode 23 and I'm really excited to be joined by the first guy on my show, which is a real honour to Mr. Justin here, who I had the privilege of being on his podcast, Ideacast. So we're kind of returning the favour. We're going back and forth. And what I loved about Justin as well is because he straight away knew the deal, you know, like the feminist views, and not that everything I do is feminist, obviously, but a large part of my work is obviously designed for women. And that was something that Justin had straight away, which I really appreciated. And also your own journey in everything you took to get to where you are, which obviously you're going to share with our lovely listeners. So welcome, Justin.
Oh, Sherisse, thank you. And, you know, before we got together for this conversation, I was thinking of a way to express my gratitude to you. And you just put this element in here that I'm the first male guest. And I think I'm going to expand that gratitude a little bit and say thank you for opening up this space for us to have this conversation and for the audience to consume. So as the first male guest and representing maleness, I am deeply grateful to be here and to have the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you. And could you just let everyone know where you are in the world as well?
Sure. I'm sure some can tell by my accent. I'm from the United States, and I am currently living in Florida. We divide ourselves up, and so there's Central Florida, North Florida, and South Florida. And I'm kind of on the cusp between Central and South Florida on the East Coast of Florida. So not that it matters to the rest of the world, but it's sort of, I guess, Central Florida might be the best way to say it. So,
yeah. Lovely. Amazing. Well, Justin, please do tell us about yourself and your life, and obviously including there what you do now, but obviously you can take us through your journey. And obviously if I need to join in at any point, I absolutely will, but this is your space to just, share your life with us.
Okay, I will. And I'll try to ground it in the spirit of what we've come together to talk about. So I was born in the mid-Atlantic region of the United States in Maryland, and just outside of Washington, D.C., to a couple of parents who were pretty much average middle-class American story. They both went to university. My mother had to leave university to have me, and excuse me. My father was a Vietnam vet, and so I was born in 1969, kind of that Vietnam vet kind of anchors that, but yeah, he was in service for about 2 years and then started a family, and came up in a very middle class neighborhood. Unfortunately, the parents that I had were both from abusive backgrounds, so that'll start setting the groundwork for the story that we might want to share today and what I feel like I could be of value to others. But yeah, they were both very dysfunctional people. They had their good points, and so I'm not trying to make anyone out to be a bad person, but they were dealing with a lot, and that showed up in the marriage, and it showed up in their ability to attend to child rearing and attend to the upbringing of the person who happens to be me. But I would like to say that in that dysfunction and that inability to overcome their demons and their past, that it was a proving ground for me and a rich environment for me to learn and to adapt and to learn anti-fragility and resilience. I say all this as a 53-year-old person. At the time it was not pleasant, but I always put it on a scale because I know there are people who came up in life who were raised in horrific circumstances and terrible circumstances. So anything I say with that obvious concession that there were folks in the world who have dealt with a lot worse, including my parents. I won't belabor their story, or I won't belabor this narrative with their stories, but they came from pretty adverse backgrounds. So they did the best they could given what they had and their sort of existential status as far as what they were, the product they became as people. So anyway, to move forward, they again did the best they could. They left each other. They dissolved the marriage when I was about 6 or 7, and I can remember when my mother came to tell me that they were separating. I was relieved at 6 or 7 because of the violence in the house and the screaming and the fighting and all of that. And we talk about battered spouses. I would, without judgment, I would say that my father was actually the battered spouse, that the maternal parent was the one with playing the role of the aggressor and the dominant person, and that my father was more of a passive, not submissive, but just a very passive person who I'm sure could be capable of their own bad behavior, but they never exhibited that. So I was stationed with that maternal parent, and they raised me. I had a weekend father, and that was fine. That was a good relationship, actually, because I would get away from my mother for a couple days of the week, and that, weekends were always pleasant. And anyway, fast forward, my mother moved me out into a rural environment when I was 13 because I was becoming somewhat of a degenerate or a miscreant, just because I was 13 and I was a typical male, and just finding myself in the form of rebellion and acting like a little wild child. And so she thought that by moving me into a rural environment that somehow that would help settle me or keep me on the straight and narrow. And it turns out that in rural Virginia, the kids there were just as devious and just as much had a proclivity for getting into trouble and things like that. So it didn't do any good, unfortunately. But again, all these things are life lessons. So drinking and getting into trouble at 13 and 14, and all the kids in that community being just as inclined to devilry and all these kind of things. It all had its purpose in sort of forming my character and teaching me lessons, right? So I guess the point I'm trying to maybe work up here is that when we seek to protect somebody, we seek to shelter them from what we would call the ills of the world, that it can have its own consequences. And so by me being exposed to some hooliganism and kind of deviant stuff, that it gave me pause to discern at that age, what is a balance, what is a good place to find ourselves not getting into trouble and not falling down into the path. And I would say that one of the reasons I sought this kind of it was a combination of hedonistic behavior, like again drug and alcohol consumption and tomfoolery and just typical teenage adolescent male behavior, which is sometimes violent, sometimes cruel. These are all things that form us, but I think part of it was the sort of in psychology, I guess they call it transference. So I was just sort of acting out what my parents were doing, and I see that now in hindsight, and that the behavior that I was exhibiting was a combination of things that were coping mechanisms for the abusive behavior in childhood. I never experienced a lot of physical abuse myself, but a lot of psychological and emotional abuse came from the parent that raised me.
Yeah, I was going to just say on that, sorry, just to intervene, that is really the epitome, isn't it, of life, is that we kind of repeat and carry out the patterns that we've always seen and we've always known. And I think that is obviously reflective of your parents, and then also at that teenage age where you're so I guess, impressionable, but also you don't know who you are. So then you just do what you've always seen, don't you? So, and to be honest, like you said, I feel like that age, I'm sure everyone went through a phase of just rebelling, and that's your way, isn't it, of always you know, if there was a safety line, for example, you kind of always tether around it or over it, or you push forward and you push back. And that's like how we understand life, isn't it, really? Because we have to test our own boundaries to really understand what we're capable of and what we'll never do again. And I think when you have been brought up in an adverse childhood, your idea of safety looks very different to someone that has had a safe upbringing. And I think that is why, I guess, in society we see people as naughty or bad or whatever, because actually we never think to ask, you know, that very important question that Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Perry have in their book is, what happened to you? And I think that's, you know, really our dictator, isn't it? Especially with ADHD and things like that, is so prevalent now in this day and age. And what I've learned in my own research is that comes from learned behavior. So it's not necessarily hereditary. But yeah, on that, I just thought I'd join in there and say that, but please do carry on.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I will put a caveat in there that this kind of wisdom and education by adversity can have its breaking point, and we're all unique. And so our breaking points are all different. And so I probably could have easily been broken had things been a little bit more adverse, say from the parental influence or supervenience, like they're coming in. So I'm very, very lucky. I probably could have turned out to be a serial killer if I had been pushed a little harder, because I did have some very dark traits and very shadowy behavior in that time period. And I won't belabor that, but I think my tenacity and my will to, my just being a bullheaded kid to seek some self-preservation and well-being, or whatever it was. Maybe it was the hedonism, just, partying and having fun with all the kids and all that kind of thing. Excuse me. But yeah, it was a navigation process. And I'm glad you brought up ADD and ADHD, because when I was a kid, prior to moving to the rural part of Virginia, I was diagnosed with dyslexia because my education career was terrible. Yeah, I never got good grades, never could focus or really wrap my head around what was being presented. And it was just the norm or the paradigm of teaching was not suited to the way I was onboarding information. Again, in hindsight, I didn't know this in real time, but my education, my career there was just not good at all. And then you going into rural Virginia, they had a good education system. It was very, well suited for what we now call neurotypical kids and things like that. But that was another interesting element. And as I got into my later teenage years, I became very depressive because of the sense of failure that I knew was there, because you're being measured against the norm. You're being measured against that standard of, oh, well, why can't you get A's and B's? They look at Johnny and Jane and Susie and all these people, and they're doing well. What the hell's wrong with you? And they actually, excuse me, took me to a school psychologist to find out if I was mentally deficient, or if there was, some. Again, this is prior to the dyslexia diagnosis. I did really well on the IQ test, and they said, well, he's not an idiot, so we need to. And unfortunately, in the late 70s, going into the early 80s, they didn't really have much help for dyslexia. They had programs, but they were expensive, and my folks didn't have a lot of money, so that kind of ruled that out. Nonetheless, as I matured and I got in through high school, I found that if I enjoyed the topic, that I would do well in it. Like, so there was social studies and things like, I didn't do very well in maths, but social things, things that had me thinking more abstractly, I really gravitated to that, and I would get A's and B's in it if I could focus on it and take an interest in it. But again, I came out of high school being somewhat depressive. That was partly due to my social functionality, I guess. Is so relating with the opposite, at the time, the opposite gender, with what I was drawn to, which was girls and women and things like that. I wasn't I had a lot of female friends, but never any that period of time where you're learning to date people, you're learning to do a little bit more intimate interactions with them, that never unfolded very well for me, as it did for a lot of kids, and so that combined with the sense of failing and not going to university and all these different things put me on this kind of road from about 18 to 24, just being very, just sort of morose and depressive. But I nonetheless soldiered on, and I buried myself in my work. And while I was in high school, I learned cooking. And so I became a cook after high school, and I went back and forth between Washington, D.C. and Monroe, Virginia, where both my parents live respectively. But I ended up in Monroe, Virginia, working at a ski resort and doing culinary and food there. And I actually paid attention, and I developed my skill sets for becoming a good cook. And so that gave me a trade to work with, and that gave me some satisfaction. It also salved the idea that you won't be going to university, but at least you have this somewhat respectable career, which paid off later in life, and I can move forward to that later. So yeah, to summarize, just a fairly dysfunctional childhood, but not to the extreme. It was not anything that was horrific. And again, the education situation was a bit of a hindrance in terms of feeling as though I had some status or some sort of sense of accomplishment.
Yeah, nice. I think, as we said, it's all about, I guess, in any situation, depending on how you look at it, you could look at your childhood and say it was really severe, it was terrible, or you could look at it and say it was fine, it was great. And I think everyone has the capacity to do that. I've got friends that wouldn't even class their upbringing as bad, and they've lived quite traumatized lives. And I've got friends that feel like they've had the worst upbringing ever, and they've lived quite a privileged life from my own interpretation. But again, that's my own interpretation of what I see. And I think I guess the real fundamental thing in all of this is that we can choose to be a victim of circumstance, or we can forge our own path from the understanding and learnings of what we gain from that. And I think when you have had a setback in whatever way it looks, that's what builds that authentic resilience, as we spoke about before, and it is that. And I think you need something to be able to push forward for. And I think when you find that thing, like for example, for your cooking, I guess you found that thing you enjoyed doing, and the social studies and things like that. I mean, I'm exactly the same. I didn't do very well at school at all. I mean, I got C's and things like that, but that was because I'd worked really hard to get that, but it was because the same thing, I wasn't passionate about the subject. I failed maths pretty much. I got like an E. And then when it came to performing arts and dance, obviously that's where I flourished. So yeah, I guess I had the same thing about people thinking I wasn't very smart. But then obviously when I went on to do my master's and my degree, I got, for my degree, I got first, and then my master's, I think it was like a merit in the end. But it's still like, I think if you judge yourself based on your past experiences and your past learnings, that doesn't dictate who you are going forward. And I think I always like to use the quote, it's judging a fish's ability to climb a tree, because you're just not meant for that particular zone. Like you put the fish in the ocean and it will swim for miles. So I think it's that concept, which is so important. And I think for anyone listening, like if you feel boxed off or you feel judged, as I always talk about, it's like you get to forge your own path and create the narrative. It's not about what was done before you. You can take what was done before you as almost like like I say, stepping stones. We forge that path based on what we know. And the real beauty of being an adult is that you get to keep learning more and learn a new way. It doesn't have to be that same route that you always took. So I think, it's nice to hear, obviously, that you've, at that time, that kind of culminated and curated that path. And I guess for you as well, when you said about dating, being a chef, that must have then changed that narrative for you, because obviously we all love someone that can cook. So did that open that door for you in that aspect?
It did. When I was at that resort, it was a very small community, and so one had to be careful when engaging in those sort of more intimate social interactions. But there were a couple of people, and I don't know if they were drawn to me by my cooking skills, but yeah, perhaps. But the environment was very unique. It was on top of a mountain, and again, very small full-time community. There was mostly transient guests and people going up to ski or play golf or whatever time of the year it was. So yeah, that made it an even more unique challenge. And I took some community college courses down in the valley, which was about a 35-minute drive, and so that was the nearest civilization. I usually just went, if I wasn't taking classes, I would just go once a week to get groceries. So it was almost a kind of monastic existence. You settled into a quite a secluded life, but the people who were there were good, and you learned to bond with them. I also joined the volunteer fire department up there, which gave me some social outlet, and also kept me from drinking because you had to be sober to show up for fire calls. So it was a good way to wean off the booze, because I was never a heavy drinker, but I just there's nothing else to do, so you pick something to do, and that gave me a little bit of steerage. But it was nonetheless a unique experience. And again, the culinary programs that they had there were really good chefs and things like that. So I learned a lot. And to go back and to address what you were saying, I think had I been given a choice somehow to have had a charmed life and a childhood where there was no adversity and everything, flowed well, including my education, I would not choose that. I would choose everything I went through, and perhaps more. Yeah. But again, not to break me to where I become psychotic or anything like that. Like one of my parents had become, they were broken to that degree. They were pulled into full psychosis and narcissism, unfortunately. And I don't want to go that far, but seeing that, tempered me. But I would always choose the adversity over living a charmed life. Also, with the education, I came to realize, and I made peace with my sense of stigma, that by about 22 or 3 years old, I let all that go, and I just started teaching myself. And again, whatever it was I found interesting and was drawn to, I would focus on that. And then I made peace with that. And so to anyone in the audience, if you're struggling with learning, or if you have learning disabilities, don't worry, you'll be fine. And unfortunately, Western culture and society is structured on a very linear hierarchy, as is in places like Japan and Korea, where they've put a high value on this kind of authority thing and learning. So unfortunately, the environment isn't that great, but if you have some will and determination, that you can forge your way through and do well. And for me, I left Virginia when I was 20. I just turned 21, moved to Florida, and I started within a couple of years to think about being self-employed and finding something I can do myself. So I stuck with culinary when I got to Florida, but then I started doing odd jobs and picking up work and doing landscaping work for people. And that sort of blossomed into a small business of my own that I could be in charge of, and that was not intellectually taxing in any way, so that I was able to have some measure of autonomy and reliance that could pay it, reward me if I put effort in. I get that reciprocity with financially. So I might suggest that to people who may be in that situation, that if you're not going to be able to get an advanced degree in something, that you consider what it is that you like, and then or you're comfortable working with, and then explore the idea of how you can benefit from that.
Definitely. I agree on that. And I actually think that if you want the accolade, you want the education, and that's going to make you feel valid or allow you to get into what it is you want to do, then absolutely go for it. But the education, the level of where you're educated to by that standard, doesn't actually define who you are, and actually is quite meaningless in the grand scheme of being a human being that matters. I think the minute you start to use those accolades as validation is when the ego is shifted, right? So like when I talk about me doing that, I feel like I use it as a way of saying, if I can do it, anyone can do it, because that was never an option for me at school. Like they would have never have thought that I would have been that person that would have been able to get a degree or whatever. And actually, to be honest, it doesn't really mean anything, but I learned a lot in that process about myself, and that was what the journey was about, and why it was important to have the education, because what I learned about myself in that process is actually what I'm doing now in my life. And funny enough, going back to what you said earlier about you wouldn't take the adversity back. I completely agree, because I wouldn't be sitting here now if hadn't had that. I actually don't know what I'd be doing because I don't even think I'd probably still have been a performer. If it was that easy, I might have been over and done with it, and then I might have been living quite an empty life, because I wouldn't have really known what my purpose was, because actually, this has been the making of who I am. So yeah, 100% that part. So then how did you get into, obviously from that space, how did you then get into kind of the work that you do now? Obviously we're going to jump obviously a couple of years here, but when did that shift happen?
Okay, another interesting and somewhat dramatic story is tied into that. And one thing to close out that chapter is for the audience, I'd like to share that you mentioned that I'm sort of an aware male, and that I have maybe perhaps a broader perspective, and I owe all of that to having been raised by a single mother, and that, and she was a strong feminist. I don't want to paint that person as having been bad, that they had some good qualities. They did the very best to give me the best childhood I could in a sort of utilitarian sense, food on the table, shelter, send me to school, clothes, all those kind of things. But they also imbued upon me the idea of equality. And so I'll just close out that by saying that, as a male who can see beyond my own male-centric, male ego kind of thing, that I owe all of that to that parent. And so moving forward into my mid to late 30s, the one thing that I brought with me in the terms of the shadowy, darker side of my upbringing in childhood was a sense of self abuse and self-blame. And my father once told me that there are two kinds of victims of abuse. There are those who blame themselves and those who blame the world. And that's probably one of the better bits of advice he had given me. And so I was the kind that would be self-destructive. And that showed up again in the drug and alcohol use as a young person, a teenager, and other forms of self-abusive behavior. And I think that all caught up with me in my late 30s, and I became very, very ill at 41. I had still no idea what happened, but my brain and my body were sort of hijacked. I want to say it was black mold that might have been the trigger, because we had a hurricane one year that I live in Florida again. Hurricane ripped the roof off of our house, and we repaired it to the best. We put a new roof on. Unfortunately, mold had moved in to the house that we didn't see, and so that probably started, my journey of getting physically ill. And again, at 41, my nervous system basically was starting to shut down, and I was having a lot of neurological problems. I was having difficulty walking, speaking, memory, things like that. And it was kind of horrifying, just like one of those things. It's like, okay, where is this coming from? And so I dealt with that for a couple of years and went to all kinds of doctors, and they didn't find anything remarkable, but in my own experience, it was very real and it was very horrible. So I worked on that recovery, and one of the things I did was to just do some brain training and some mind exercises, and then I slowly fell into the world of philosophy and a little bit of spirituality that revolves around some of these deeper questions that we ask. Because I'd always been kind of since I was a kid, I'd carry around books by guys like Robert H. Monroe and Ram Dass and a few other people. So it's very spiritual light, if you will. So I was always curious. And anyway, I got into the rabbit hole of philosophy, and because it does challenge you to think, it does challenge you to ask questions. And so that is, and I'm still, this is however many years later, I guess I'm 53. So yeah, about 10 or 12 years later, I was able to rehabilitate myself that way, and taking better, good care of my body, and eating right, and cleaning things up in that regard. And we cleaned the house up, obviously. We tore all the walls out and put new walls in and things like that. It was kind of an interesting endeavor. But nonetheless, in the process of rehabilitating myself through self-teaching of, again, ideas that are in philosophy, I found myself just on this amazing and beautiful journey of continuously exploring questions and inquiry and ideas without really seeking strong, solid answers. That's where I've kind of arrived in my journey. Well, I haven't even arrived anywhere, but I mean, that's where I'm kind of at present. I can sort of pin it right now that it's a ceaseless and unending inquiry. And I don't grasp the answers too rigidly. I move with those questions into another set of questions, and it's very circular. It just goes on and on and on. So it may not be everybody's cup of tea, but if there is something, if you are working on trying to, let's say you were in an abusive either childhood or adolescence, or a relationship with a partner, and you're recovering, that it's not a distraction. It's more that it is giving your mind something to focus on that is positive. And that's what maybe the takeaway that I would offer is that in recovery, one can find themselves immersed in art, or as you did with dance and what I would call the fluid arts, the dancing arts. And so that could be a valuable takeaway from this conversation, perhaps, is that if you are enacting self-care, but not quite sure where it is, then think about the one thing or two things perhaps that you find interesting in life. Again, whether it's art, nature, music, dance, poetry, literature. I would say that all of those things have one common ground, and it's positive affect. It's positive response in relationship with that which you are interested in. So in other words, you could take up something less positive. I can't think of a good example, but perhaps fighting. You enjoy fighting, and so maybe it feels good and it's therapeutic, but is it good for your body to take punches? Or so that's kind of dramatic. But I mean, there's ways to make that change in your behavior and habits. It could be less positive. And so I would say, again, if what you're pursuing seems to be positive by you and the standards of society, then that may be the way to anchor yourself into understanding that you are doing something good for yourself. So I'll pass it back to you and see if you have any thoughts on.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I feel like there's definitely a common theme with people that have been through adverse situations and circumstances in that we are trying to find freedom from the situation. It's the escapism, isn't it? And I think that's why a lot of people get into doing a hobby like, crafting, or, knitting, or, even like you said, a physical thing, for me, dance, or even art, just in general, like there's all these things. And I think a lot of what we get wrong, I think, in society is we think that escapism is in watching TV and things like that, but there's no you're not fueling your mind in that sense. It's almost numbing. So I think a lot of people, when they go into depressive states, will just watch TV non-stop for like days on end, and actually what they're doing is just kind of like numbing that part of their brain, when actually if you did focus on doing something, it would feed the brain. So if instead of like maybe watching TV, you was listening to audiobooks or listening to podcasts, or writing and journaling, like all of these things. And actually, it's funny enough, when you said about the fighting, I would use the fighting as a physical outlet, but not necessarily for the freedom aspect. I feel like if you wanted to do the fighting to let out your anger, to release emotions, and like all of that, then that would be absolutely right for that. But then equally, there would need to be something that you would do to fill your cup up, because almost like the fighting is letting out, then you'd want to do something to bring in. So I think that's a beautiful cycle. And also what we're not taught, I think if we were taught at a young age that we needed to have these different outlets and inputs of like what we need for ourselves, we would grow up a lot healthier and happier. But I personally believe that, even at school, we're kind of taught to be one of many. It's a bit like, I don't know if you've seen Lego Movie, but it's like everyone does the same thing they're supposed to do, and we're all supposed to be a clone of each other and do this same format. Individuality isn't celebrated, and I think that for me is like the massive shake that I would give, that I am trying to implement into society now, because I just feel like my way through this again is through dance, but there's so many ways to add this value into our lives. And I think as adults, or whoever's listening, like we really do have that freedom to choose what we input into our lives and how we release the things that aren't serving us anymore. Because I think a lot of us just feel like, oh, okay, we've got to carry these emotions with us, we've got to carry this oppression with us, we've got to carry this burden and all of the weight of society, the world, and ourselves and our parents, all of this trauma, we've got to carry it around with us. And I was doing that, and I don't know if that's probably another thing for you, that if you feel like that added to you getting physically ill, like it's almost that point where you get to, I can't do this anymore. And I guess for me, that kind of leads nicely into, the podcast is called Permission to Shine. So it's, in your story, where do you think was that moment that you were like, I can't do this anymore, I can't live like this, like I know there's more for me? And maybe it's the same story that you gave, but yeah, please do elaborate on your side.
Sure, I'll be happy to do that. And so that illness, the physical illness, coincided with probably that epiphany, or at least the pre-epiphany of I'm dark, I'm toxic, I'm broken, I can't continue. Because when I was in that age range, I was very angry, and didn't perhaps know the depth of that anger. And that came from both those sort of melancholic years in post-adolescence, as well as, and then that was a variety of factors and adjutants for that, and then the parent issue. So it all kind of came to a head, and that physical illness was a great sort of outlet. It was a great opportunity to move through the necessary catharsis, the realization, the facing it, and being aware of that very deep shadow that was following me around, or right all over me, however we want to milk that analogy. But yeah, that coincided. It came at the right time, let's put it that way. And so I had to reason through it, and I had to not just reason through it intellectually, but reason through it emotionally, and sit with it and sit with myself. Again, becoming very physically ill, I wasn't able to do certain things, and I allotted myself time, whether I liked it or not, to do nothing but face and let things catch up with me, things that were not necessarily pleasant, or like you say, we lean into escapism to get away from certain existential crises in our lives. And so this was, again, some people call it a wake-up call or a dark night of the soul. And yeah, I would maybe tag it that way. But what I did with it, I hope, in hindsight, when I'm old and reflecting on my life, that I made the right moves, or the best possible moves that I could make at the time. And that it led me it changed my trajectory. It led me in a new direction, and it led to a direction of healing, but also a direction of sense making, of ability to, for every moment that I have left in my life, that I filter and process information, perceive things, perceive my environment, my relationships through a different lens. So it was almost like you were changing lenses, from that more shadowy, more like negative affect lens, to something that's allows me a better clarity of the metaphoric vision of how to relate to people and relate to others. Because when we relate to people, we bring a lot of our past selves into that relationship, and it's what we call projection. We tend to exhibit and display who we are, unconsciously or consciously, in those relationships, and how we relate with other people can be definitely dictated by everything that's come from the past. In fact, neuroscientists talk about, the way we make sense of our present moment is that it's a lot of modeling from the past, and the mind uses its ability to make sense of things based on what it's experienced in the past. And so It's very natural. There's no judgment to it. It's not like we're doing it on purpose.
No, for sure. It's that mirror, though, isn't it, that we talk about,
right.
Like you mirror it out. And I think that's a really important point that you just said about projection, because it relates back to even your parents. They were projecting their own insecurities onto each other and onto you. And I think that's the way then we shape our understanding of love and relationships, and then we have to understand that for ourselves. And that's been definitely something I've had to learn and unpack, in every area of my life, with friendship. And it's funny because I feel like with teaching I never really had that, but I think it's a different space, because obviously the love's different. But when it's like close friendships and romance and those things, I guess, and this is where we could spiral into that self-loathing stage, and I definitely had that for myself too, is when you hit that wall and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm the problem, I'm the issue, and you start shaming yourself. But when you're blissfully unaware of that for all those years, it's almost like the arrogance and the ego takes the forefront. So when you actually look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm doing all of these things wrong, then we start to spiral in the opposite way. And it's almost from that breaking point, as you said, that where we crack so the light gets in, and that's where you get these different understandings and perceptions. And I think it's so wonderful how you have this inquiry, this constant inquiry, because I think we are in Western culture so focused on being right. We just want to know the answers so we can be right, and we want control. And I think that is just a really beautiful way to live, is to like ask these questions and be open-ended all the time, because that's something that I'm learning myself, and equally from living in my ego for so long, I dip into that wanting to be right at times, and I'm not afraid to admit that. But equally, I pull myself up on it. So if I feel myself do it, I'm like, is that serving? Is that going to benefit you from being right? Actually, what do you get out of that? And 9 times out of 10, my real like benefit of that situation, if it was something I suggested and then the person did it, it wouldn't be to be right, it would be to have helped that person, I think, fundamentally, which I think comes from the learning and growing, doesn't it? And I think, like you said, like the journey is what it is all about, because if we didn't have these journeys, we wouldn't have the answers that we have or want to ask the right questions. So I think that's just a really beautiful way of looking at it, that every road and every door that we could have taken, and sometimes like we're forced to take, like we don't necessarily want to walk in these doors of trauma and all neglect and all of these things, but they're the ones that are forced on us. But from what we learned from them, it's like my friend likes to use an escape room actually as for her analogies of life. But I feel like that is from like my experience of, I guess trauma, is that now I know how to unlock these things, and I know the patterns and I know the codes. So when I do ever feel like I'm falling into a dark space again, I can pull myself out very quickly, because I know the tells, and that's what you get from going through it and learning it. So I guess for me, that's your question too, in this process and everything you've learned, do you feel like one, there's anything that comes up for you now that's a reflection of that? And two, how do you manage that for yourself, in those situations? And maybe what would be, I guess it's probably rephrasing what you've already said, but I guess the advice that you take for yourself in this.
So I'll ask you to the first part of your question. Give me that first part that you were asking about.
Do you feel like old patterns of trauma repeat for you now, and what are they?
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I understood 100%. Yes, I think there'll always be there. I think that there is a volume setting on that, and that we do not necessarily have our grip on that volume setting, but that the volume setting in an abstract way or in a roundabout way can be managed. And I think it is through the activities, again, excuse me, as I was saying earlier, it's not distracting necessarily, but it is refocusing your attention on the matters before you and the relationships before you. And so that the opportunities for those, I like to call them shadowy aspects of ourselves, are not in the fore. They are not there. And they may not necessarily be steering the ship. And so that when you are creating experience with other persons or other situations, that is an attention management system, so or means. And so that's how I might respond to that, is that, and again, we're all different, but that if you are focused on, and again, it's not necessarily escape, it's more prioritizing, and that you find yourself relating and interacting with persons and situations in a different lens. And shifting that lens, again, can be very dramatic, or it can be very mundane in how you manage that shifting. But always, so we could use the analogy that I've heard before, is that if we have a dark, traumatic passed through abuse and violation and things, that it's akin to a wound, and the wound, like a flesh wound, will scar up, and you'll always have that little scar there. And sometimes the scar, you'll feel it. I have a little surgical scar on my side and my abdomen, and it's been years and I still feel the nerves, but it, excuse me, it doesn't interfere with my life, or, it doesn't dictate much, but that might be a good analogy. So to move forward with the new lensing and the new perspective, and this where I may be able to offer some of the fruit that I've harvested from my years of going through that education, if you will, of first adversity and then processing the adversity and then seeing the good in it, is I would say I'll start with something you said, and I think it's very, very important for our modern culture. And we talk about group identity and individualism and ourselves as unique creatures. And I think that's deeply important. But what I would then suggest is I recently interviewed a biologist, and he made a very good point about a kind of obligate altruism, or a sense of doing good, but not for your own benefit and not even for the benefit of others, but it's for the benefit of the whole, for the good. So whether it's a small family unit or the entirety of our human population, if we think in that sense of cellularity, like we're all unique little cells in a system. And I think it's a safe argument to take that very literally, that 8 billion human beings living on one tiny little planet in a tiny little galaxy amongst billions of galaxies, or even a little solar system in a galaxy, that we are a system. And I'll scale it back down to say family and community, that when we are a healthy cell and we are contributing to our environment as a healthy cell, that we will then pass that healthiness on, or the healthy expression, on to others, and that impacts them. So just like if we were heart cells in a heart, and we were functioning well, that the heart would function well. And the heart is very important. It needs to deliver blood to the rest of the body. And so if a heart cell is not functioning well, it impedes upon the heart's ability to do its job. So there's a metaphor to work with there, and that as you as an individual have a very, very important role to play. Part of that is self-maintenance and self-care, and part of that is the collective maintenance and care. And I use that word very cautiously, because collectivism can be bad too. People have done social experimentation with collectivism, and it didn't work out so well. So I don't mean it in that regard. I just mean it's that you have an impact on others. And there's other ways to create metaphors for this, but that's one thing I would definitely want to suggest to folks, is to think of it that way, use that analogy, so that if you are hurting, suffering, and in the process of transformation, to that you have cultivated self-awareness to realize, oh my gosh, when I'm projecting my sadness, my despair, my angstiness, whatever it is, that it reverberates. It has an impact on my family, it has an impact on my friends and my community. And that is a gift. That is such a huge gift, to realize that and to have that epiphany, because as you've pointed out, we do fall into escapism. We fall into narcissism. We fall into this, sense of like, oh, it's not me, it can't be me. That's like, goes back to the traumatized person blames it on the world. That's where we get into that kind of construct of identity and reality, that it's like, it's never me. No. It's the world, and that's not good, because that's self-deception. So I can stop there for a second if you wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And I really love that analogy of, being part of the heart, because I think that's so it, and I guess that's for me in my messaging is obviously, like when you shine your light out, you don't never know how many people you're inspired by your light. And it's that continuation of that, like we are one single drop in this ocean. So if we are all contributing to being the best versions of ourselves, then by default, that will carry out further and further to the wider world and universe and beyond. And I think that really is it. And it's such an important factor of, like, if you are in a hard space right now, or you are questioning your worthiness, or whether you want to be here, you are needed. You are needed for the collective. And I think that's why, like you said, self-care and self-love is important. And, my version of self-love, as I always say, is self-acceptance plus self-respect. That's all it needs to be. You don't need to be buying yourself bougie things and going all lavish if you don't want to. Just making sure that you are fed and watered and nurtured is enough, and nurture looks different to all of us, but you have to listen to yourself, and you have to respect yourself first, because from that point is where everything else will come in turn. And I think, again, like what we've been saying the whole way through, you aren't a victim of your circumstance. At any point, you can take what you've learned and recreate, the life that you want and you deserve from that learning and that understanding. And from this podcast and also podcasts beyond this, there's been people that I've spoken to that have had such severe trauma that have transmuted that, that pain into, liquid gold. And I'll say that's the alchemization of, the real beautiful part of being human and suffering, is that it doesn't have to be for nothing. And I think that's really an important thing, I think, to kind of like circle on this whole sort of segment here, is that, we are just worthy and deserving of everything we want, and we don't have to be that what you were before. Again, all of this reinventing, recreating, because you are so important as you are, and you are needed and necessary. I guess that's the main thing. And I'm sure at some point through your healing, you would have had that very realization where you're like, oh my gosh, like I can't do this for that reason, and that's why I'm here and I'm doing this now. So I guess we'll kind of try and round off as much as we can, because obviously there's been a lot here. So if you want to kind of, summarize on what you want to say, really. And then I like to kind of close out with like a little soul to soul message. So if you want to kind of summarize, like, what you want the listeners to know, and then if there's anything like burning in your heart that you want to share, please do.
Okay. Well, thank you for that opportunity. I think what I might do is, and when we had our pre-meeting a few weeks ago, I was laying all these crazy philosophical things down on you. And I think I'll spare the audience of the treachery of all that kind of thing that philosophers do. But, some of my takeaways that I've gotten for my own benefit that I'll share, but I'll do it in terms that are not obnoxious. And that is that as human beings, you hit the nail on the head earlier, that we live in a world that has to be right. And that is an artifact or a legacy of what we call the Enlightenment project of the, say, the 17th century and on. And there's great benefit to that. We have science, we have technology, we have medicine, we have all these things that come from it. But we also have this, one philosopher that I follow calls it propositional tyranny, that we live in this very binary state of something is either right or wrong, and there's never the two shall meet, but yes, there is space between right and wrong. And that's propositional knowledge is one particular type of knowledge. There's also participatory knowledge and perspectival knowledge. We need to cultivate that if we want to cultivate a wise culture in the West. It already exists in other cultures. They already have this figured out. We don't. We're sort of in a vacuum, and that vacuum includes meaning and sense and all these things. And so we lens meaning and sense through this propositional apparatus or perspective. And so that's the one takeaway I would want for the audience, is that, it's okay to live in contradiction. It's okay to live in paradox. It's okay to live in mystery. It's okay to live with unknowns, and that's fine. We are just humble little primates that live on a very, very small planet, and the word humility means to ground. So when we're humble, we're grounding ourselves. We're not off on lofty ideas of our egos being stroked by being right about things. That's the one thing, as I said earlier, for me, it's incessant inquiry and never wanting an answer to be true or false. Only the answer leads to another set of questions that can enrich the environment of the question making. It's in philosophy, it's called dialectic. It's an exchange of ideas beyond rhetoric. Rhetoric is something that preachers and politicians do, and it seduces us all, but to get into dialectic is to enter into a good faith conversation with someone, not to be right or wrong, but to understand perspective and to shift your own perspective, to expand it. And I think that's the path that leads us to wisdom. So if you are cultivating a practice of self-care, self-improvement, self-enrichment, and it's less about the ego and more about the true self and the self that relates with the world, that we expand our ways of knowing and understanding. And I bring this into faith too, into spirituality. Some of the beautiful mystics of Islam and Christianity, they got this. And it's basically non-dual thinking, like we see in the East, in Advaita Vedanta and Hindu and Jainist thinking. And it is to say that I cannot know. And all I know is I'm in the presence of something. I am working with something that is ineffable or inexplicable, but I am nonetheless in that exchange, in that reciprocity with whatever it is. And that could be as mundane as two people having a conversation, trying to understand each other, or somebody just being just completely gobsmacked by nature and saying, oh, what is this? Where are we? And what is this? So I would say as a final thought that, first of all, love yourself, appreciate yourself, and do it in a healthy way, in a way that that benefits your holistic being, the all of you, rather than just you're feeling good. Sometimes that well-being is mundane and it doesn't really show up as a dopamine hit or some sort of gratification. And also, lately I've been thinking, what could every human being find incontrovertible and that or not controversial? It would be to aspire to the good, the true, and the beautiful, whatever that means to you. And by true, again, I don't mean the propositional true. It is more faith. Have faith in what you're doing. Have faith in your fellow person, whomever it is you're relating with. Have faith in the world, the planet itself, the system that keeps us alive. So have faith in all of that, and start with those as a grounding element, and be yourself from there. And never be satisfied with an answer. Don't think answers are the right. don't stick on something. So I'll stop there. And if you were going to do a soul to soul, so I'm curious about that. I want to know what we're going to do there. So that's my final thoughts, my parting thoughts.
No, amazing. And I love that you said that humanity means the ground. I've never heard that concept before, and I love that.
Yeah, humus. Is humus is a type of earth. It's a rich soil. But yeah, the Latin, the etymology is grounding and humility. We typically think of humility as like if you're, pants drop in public and your undies are there and it's like, whoopsie, wardrobe malfunction. That's that kind of humility. But and in a way there is something there. It's exposing yourself, it's being vulnerable, but no, it's more that you ground yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that so much. Thank you so much for sharing all that. Yeah, so soul to soul is kind of like I guess you've kind of done it in a way, but I guess from a philosophical perspective, but I guess maybe from, like that space of that inner child, like that space there, what would you either say to your younger self, or what would you feel like anyone that's in your same shoes right then at that moment, that pinnacle moment where it feels hard and it feels difficult, like what is that soul-led message that you want to say? And it might be the same things you've already said, but there might just be a different way of connecting to it when you think about it coming from your soul space.
Perhaps to my child, I would to me, which is a child, I would probably say what I said a moment ago, and it's always look to the true, the good, and the beautiful, no matter what's going on around you. As an adult, I say to people who I'm speaking with that may be asking me for advice or something, and as I say, be grace in the storm, be the calm in the storm, and don't contribute to the storm. Now, that might be a lot for a child to try to digest, but I would say it in probably the best terms to a child, which would be, it's okay. You're okay. No matter what happens, you're okay. I would caution that, there can be times when abuse is so bad that it's hard to see that. I never had that level of abuse, so I don't want to sound hubristic or arrogant that it is okay. There are times when it's not okay. But if I were to speak to myself, I would say, it's okay. You're going to be fine. It's not easy, but you're going to be fine. And if you can try to keep that perspective that no matter what happens to you, it is something that you can find the light in, find the positive in, no matter how painful it is. It's like, again, if you have a physical illness or an injury and it hurts, so you break a bone or you have a tumor or something and it hurts and you're sick and you're miserable. But if you're treating yourself and the doctors are treating you and whatever your protocol for healing is, that you get through it, that you'll be fine. A lot of cancer survivors, as you said earlier, people who do go through adversity have this perspective, and people who survive life-threatening illnesses are some of the happiest people in the world. And they've been there at the threshold of death, and they realize the important things in life. And so I couldn't dump all that on a 6-year-old or a 10-year-old, but I would, in my best way to articulate to a child, I would say, or to anyone that's listening, is it's going to be okay. You're going to be fine. Seek to preserve yourself, seek to care for yourself, but nonetheless, learn from what you're going through and see the benefits that might come from it. if it's possible for you at the time. And if it's not, that's fine, because you will have the ability to be in hindsight later on, and then that time activate that and see what you can find from the adverse experience, whether it's a breakup with a partner, reconciling with an abusive parent, any of this. Bullies as a child, bullying is terrible, and but we have to see that those are just broken people, and they're not doing the best they can, but they're just broken people. So.
And projecting, as we said.
Yes, yes, and feeding themselves off of your misery.
Yeah, and you know what's funny? We have this really traditional old British saying, it's like, keep calm and carry on. And I think I've always thought of that as quite a toxic way of being, but how you just phrased that then made me make sense of that in a different way. I think when you said about like being calm in the storm and not participating to the storm, I think it's a really important thing that you just said there, because I suffered from being angry. Like that was my trauma response, was to be angry, and then I'd get, as a response of always seeing aggression, I would get aggressive in my own way. And I think that really is it. Keep calm and carry on, because it's, allow yourself to be in this, observe it. You don't have to participate in it, but know that everything continues to move as life does. It flows, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a really nice way of just looking at that. It from a non-toxic perspective is that, this too shall pass. So it's just understanding that everything in life, the highs and the lows, will pass through you. And if you allow it to pass through you, and you resist the need to resist, and you flow with it, I think it just makes it a more palatable experience, and you'll learn from whatever you need to learn. If you need to make a raft on that river, you will. If you can just swim along, you will. I think thank you for all of your insights there, Justin. They're really really different way of looking at things, and also mirrors, I guess, the theme of what we talk about and why it's important to talk about these things. So thank you so much. Where can we all find you? Obviously I'll put your information in the description, but where can listeners find you, and what have you got going on at the moment?
Okay, I have a interview series on YouTube, and it's called IdeaCast, and we can have a link for that. I also have a website that I built, years ago, and I'd had a paywall on it because it cost some money to set it up, and I just had my web developer take the paywall off, so now it's free, and I'll just ask for a donation if somebody found value in it. And so the website is full of content that speaks to what I've been discussing with you. And that is what I call transformation support, would be the tagline to it. And it just helps people gently to work through things. So I have things in there about childhood, about heart matters. I use the heart as a metaphor for our feelings and our emotions, and learning to be the inquirer, and to suspend judgment. That's one of my biggest things that I love to work with people, is suspending judgment. And the Greeks were onto this in ancient pre-Socratic philosophy, is that you suspend judgment and you have a better state of well-being. So anyway, all of that's in that website, and it's called Illumine Life, ILLUMINE Life, and that you could just Google and find it. That's my project so far. And like I said, I do it more as a public service, as a way of giving back to the world and being that good cell within the system that is trying to help the other cells function properly, because I think that is not the panacea or the cure-all for society and the world, but I think it's a start, and I think it's a means in an arsenal of means, or a toolbox of means to help us become healthier, happier society. And I say happy with a grain of salt. I think well-being to me is more important. I think happiness arises, as does misery, and that but in being in that unflappable state of well-being, again, grace in the storm, that kind of thinking. So all of that's baked into that website, and it's all there for free. Yeah, it's all for free. So yeah, if there are links down below, I welcome you to come give me your feedback. My email address is there. It's an ongoing project. It's never going to be done. Just like my sense of inquiry forever. It's that project that I do. But again, it's a means. And if it ever develops that into a place where I can have workshops with people, either on Zoom or in person, I'd like to do mentoring and coaching with people. We'll see how that works out. If people want to talk about these things. So so that's the direction I want to head in. That's what I aspire to. But the website's there. Yeah. So
love that. Okay. Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Justin, for, as I said, all of your insights and, all of your knowledge and your life experience. And thank you for sharing that and, opening up, because I'm sure that, might not be something you talk about all the time. It might be something, but yeah, thank you for sharing that with the audience. And thank you.
Sherisse, I'm very much and sincerely grateful to you for this space and this time that you've opened up for both of us to have this dialogue, because this is something that I believe in people sharing thoughts and ideas that, again, are meant to be digested and dispensed into the world for the benefit of others. And so I want to thank you and offer my gratitude and acknowledge you for that. I think that's a wonderful service that we're both providing, not to pat our backs, but, we're both aspiring to those similar things. And so thank you. Thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.